We know the grid is undergoing massive change, which creates massive opportunities for local energy. The Energy Changemakers Podcast offers rich conversations with industry leaders to help you and your company capture opportunities to build the decentralized grid. I'm your host, Elisa Wood. Welcome to the Energy Changemakers Podcast. Hey everyone, Elisa Wood here from Energy Changemakers. It's no secret that for years, utilities sidelined distributed energy resources. Some even worked to block them. It wasn't surprising. After all, DERs threaten utility revenue. But now you're probably hearing rumors that utilities are softening this stance. Marco Krapels is here to tell us that is, in fact, the case. Utilities are suddenly keen to know more about distributed energy. Krapels' long career spans from bringing solar lights to African schools to banking to leadership positions at SolarCity and Tesla, is now a senior vice president at Enphase Energy. So, what's driving this reversal in utility sentiment toward DERs? Does it signal a lasting change? And what could it mean for how new load gets served? Enjoy the conversation. Hello, Marco. Thanks so much for being here today on our podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's great to talk to you today because your work is the heart of so much of what's exciting in the power industry right now. You know, the concept of making the home into a kind of power plant. And you've had an interesting career from banking to SolarCity to Tesla to Enphase, all the sexy companies, right? What drew you to this sector, clean energy, and what keeps you going today?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I remember when I started the journey, I used to have hair and I was not gray. You know, they call it the solar coaster for a reason, but it gives me great purpose. I wake up every morning feeling that I'm going to make a difference. And when you deploy as many gigawatts of product as Enphase has deployed, it really moves the needle. If you, over your career, can deploy clean energy equivalent to several nuclear power plants, that feels good. You're making a difference. You're driving around, you see systems, you're like, yeah, that's ours. You talk to customers, you meet friends. Yeah, I've got your product. So it just gives me great purpose. And the way I got into this is really, I was a banker. You're right. I'm still a recovering banker. But at the end of my 20-year banking career, I started to finance solar. And I liked it. And I remember I took a little sabbatical at the end of my banking career to figure out what I wanted to do. And during that sabbatical, I went to Africa and I bought 2 containers of solar lights. And I spent 3 months driving around with some friends of mine to various communities in Zambia at that time and to provide schools with solar lights. I mean, this was 15, 17 years ago. And when I saw what kind of a difference it made, you know, one school I remember, this is Sioma High School in the western province of Zambia, in the Baratza land, which is a tribal area there. And one high school, which is the only high school in a 50-mile radius, where kids would walk for 2 or 3 weeks to get to school at the beginning of the season, and then would walk home again at the end of the season. That school had a pass rate from the 9th to 10th grade, which is there. It's a critical grade where they take an exam and all of that. They had a pass rate of in the low teens. And when we equipped them with solar and they could study at night, the pass rate went above 60%. I remember we shared those results with the United Nations at that time. I remember we got a letter from Christiana Figueres, who's my absolute hero when it comes to climate, congratulating us on those results. And so we started a foundation. I started a foundation, empoweredbylight.org, to do more of that. And I started to feel like, hey, this makes me happy to help people with solar. Battery storage was coming up, but it just made me happy and it gave me great purpose. And so that's how I got into it. I ended up leaving banking to join SolarCity, and then Tesla, now of course Enphase, over the last 15 years. Last 5 years with Enphase, which has been amazing. And I remember when I met Elon and his cousin Lyndon for the first time, it's around 2010. So Lyndon and his brother Pete co-founded SolarCity with Elon. Elon was the chairman, and SolarCity ended up becoming the largest solar company in the US at that time. I think our Last year, before the Tesla acquisition, we did over 850 megawatts. So that was SolarCity, Tesla. They were kind of sister companies at the time before the merger. But I remember leaving banking and joining SolarCity, which was a great culture, and worked with people like Hayes and Barnard and Tanguy Serra, who then since founded Loompel, now Goodleap. And we just loved going to work because you knew you were making a difference. And that's why I got into it. That's why I'm still in it. It just really makes me happy.
So interesting. I didn't know about your work in Africa. It made me think about a microgrid event I hosted in Chicago several years ago. And the speaker was speaking to those who were just beginning their careers, kids out of college looking for jobs. And he talked about how when he came out of the military, he had a choice between working for a company that made widgets or a company that made microgrids, and how happy he was years later to choose something that actually saved lives. So it's interesting how this form of energy really brings with it meaning. But let me jump back to something you said about producing as much power from distributed energy as a couple of nuclear power plants. What did you mean by that? How does that work?
Yeah, and it also goes back to what you said about, what do you tell young people who are graduating? What are they going to do, particularly with all the AI happening? And all I can say is deploy as much clean energy as possible. Let's do that together. And we can do it. And we can really move the needle. People are like, residential solar, battery storage doesn't really move the needle. So let me get to your question about multiple nuclear power plants. If you look at what we're facing right now, which is an enormous challenge, right? Let's call it what it is. I mean, San Francisco is now the AI capital of the world. And you have companies that have popped up, whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, Google Gemini is great, that are really rolling out products that are changing companies, changing lives. And there's going to be a tremendous amount of energy needed for that. According to most analysts, we're going to need at least an additional 100 gigawatt of energy capacity in the US to support the additional load. And so if you look at residential solar battery storage, commercial as well, if you look at rooftops, in the United States, there are 86 million homes, and only about 8% have solar. And so there's 80 million homes left to go. Now, there was a podcast recently that I watched with Shamat that actually got reposted by Donald Trump, believe it or not, on Truth Social. And Shamat made the point, he goes, one of the ways we can really tackle this energy problem in the US is if we put solar and battery storage on millions of new homes and just basically take load off the grid, and to free up that load for the interconnection of all these data centers. And I was really happy he said that. I was very surprised that it got posted on Truth Social, and happy about that. Because if we put a 10 kilowatt solar system, track with me on these numbers here, but if we put a 10 kilowatt solar system and a 10 kilowatt hour battery on 10 million new homes, it's not that many. We already have it on a little over 5 million. So we just add 10, and there's 80 million addressable homes left to go. So we add solar and battery storage on 10 million new homes, we can unleash 100 gigawatts of new energy capacity with 100 gigawatt hours of storage, which is a flexible, dispatchable asset and can provide grid support, meet peak demand, provide locational value, delay the upgrades to the local networks that utilities are worried about. There's a lot we can do there. It's right there. And the interconnection points are already there. They're called homes. You don't have to wait for years. You don't have to wait for small nuclear reactors that haven't really been deployed or need to be permitted. It's literally right there. I am completely optimistic about us being able to solve this energy challenge. And we compare ourselves to China, and we're talking about, we're deploying way too little compared to China. There's 80 million rooftops left to go. And what are we waiting for? I mean, we can totally solve this problem. That is equivalent to multiple nuclear power plants. And then people go, can we really manufacture all that? Yes. The Enphase factories alone in the US, we've got a big one in Arlington, Texas, which produces both microinverters and batteries. We can spit out a nuclear power plant a year from that factory. So we can. Yes, we can.
Wow, that's incredible. Hey, let's talk about the utility and the distributed energy industry relationship, which at times has been fraught. For years, utilities viewed solar, in forms of distributed energy as a threat because it was a zero-sum game. If somebody put solar on their roof, they were taking business away from the utility. Now, you've been through these wars, and you're saying something very different now. You're saying that the utility relationship is flipped. Tell me what you're seeing.
That's right. There has been a change. And I've been on the other side, right? I had a dinner, and I will not name this person, just be polite, but I had dinner with a senior vice president from a very large utility in California recently. And we're literally having this conversation about how we, the solar guys, used to be the enemy. And we were fighting to keep net metering. I mean, I ran campaigns at that time for SolarCity, Tesla, Nevada. We made a lot of noise. We got rid of the Nevada Utility Commission. The governor replaced all the commissioners, reinstated net metering at that time. It was like 2015. And I have scars on my back from that one. But what we were really fighting, we were fighting the wrong battle. And what we both need, because solar alone isn't enough. It's great for generation, but you need to be able to shift that production to the times that you need to dispatch when the grid needs it most, right? And so we don't want to add more to a duck curve, right? That's already there. So what we really need is dispatchable, flexible energy behind the meter as much as possible that has a real use in front of the meter. And maybe some of it can be placed in front of the meter, even at the home. It depends on utilities. If they want to rate base, they want to own it, you can put it in front of the meter. Still at the home, making use of the interconnection. You can reserve some of the capacity for the homeowner to have backup, but you can provide remaining capacity to the utility for full control, ownership, and dispatch. The whole point being is that what I'm seeing now, this is happening fairly quickly, is where we used to not be able to have a conversation with the utility, even at director level. Now we're sitting with vice presidents and senior vice presidents to figuring out together how we solve the problem, which is, I've got these massive loads that need to be interconnected. Where am I going to get the capacity from? How do I keep the grid stable? I don't want businesses to leave my state. There's a lot of, the governor, for instance, in California, Governor Newsom wants people to be here. Well, we need to provide the energy that's needed and the flexible capacity that's needed to allow for these interconnections. And so now we're having a conversation with utilities. We're not fighting each other. For instance, in Enphase, we have almost 1 million homes that have IPV systems in California. That's a lot. And only a small percentage have batteries because, they're NEM 3, right? A lot of them are still NEM 1 and NEM 2. And so we could add a lot of storage, soon bidirectional EV chargers, to those existing interconnection points called customers. And that can provide tremendous value to the utility and also deploy new ones. And so we're trying to figure out together with them, where are their pain points? Some of them are localized. Some of them need significant transformer upgrades in certain areas. Could we alleviate some of that by deploying more distributed flexible capacity? So the conversation has moved from solar only, which wasn't quite the solution for the utilities at least, to bundled flexible assets that provide real value. And that is allowing us to have a meaningful dialogue with them, figure out how together we can solve problems at scale. I'm having these conversations at executive level in multiple states, and we've also transacted, right? So we've executed a program with Green Mountain Power, which is a very progressive utility in Vermont, and they have basically decided, we don't want to build a bunch of gas peakers. We want to depend and rely on a significant amount of deployed flexible capacity, starting with battery storage. We had their CEO over recently. We're going to look at layering in our bidirectional EV chargers, which can also dispatch to the grid. And so basically what you're seeing already is progressive utilities such as Green Mountain Power, also Octopus Energy in Europe, 1,5 in Germany. They are already doing this. What I'm talking about here is not pie in the sky. It's already being deployed by very smart utilities who see and harness the value of flex and also improving service to their customers and ultimately lowering rates.
Yeah, we had Jigar Shah on recently on the show, and he said it's no longer a solar and storage industry. It's a storage and solar industry. And of course, that's a big element of this growing flexibility.
He's right.
So flexibility is the word, right? It seems to be on the lips of everyone in this industry. You often talk about the idea that the future is flex. What does that mean in practical terms for the grid? How is distributed flexible capacity recreating the grid? How does it work?
That's a great question. This is something that I start to really believe in, and I've been talking about it also at Climate Week in New York about the future's flex. What I'm saying is what we need is very smart, fully integrated behind the meter home energy management systems that harness the flexible value of solar, because solar can also be curtailed. And we can do that easily with Enphase, with our microinverter, and literally panel by panel. So when there's too much, we can curtail. Customers can be paid for that if there's value. And in certain markets where you have dynamic pricing and sometimes negative pricing, such as in the Netherlands, we get significant amount of events where you have negative pricing, then you get paid to consume because you're taking capacity off the grid. And so one is you need, so the flexible asset, solar is indeed a flexible asset. Battery, of course, is a flexible asset. The EV charger is a flexible asset and soon is going to be bidirectional. Enphase is launching its bidirectional EV charger this year. And then you have the thermostat that can be integrated in the overall ecosystem, which is a flexible asset because it controls the HVAC. And then you need a system that's really smart that optimizes all of that for the lowest marginal cost per kilowatt hour for the homeowner, but also can be available to the utility to provide flexible capacity that can be distributed to the grid, not just on an individual home level, but on a total aggregated level. And what do I mean by that? What the utility doesn't want to be dependent on is Bob or Susan's Wi-Fi working. And they cannot depend on that. The utility is going to send, and this is where I see the future. Utility is going to send a signal, and they're going to say, I need 50 megawatts of capacity in this zip code in the next 15 minutes. The good thing here is that Enphase, and we already rolling out capacity forecasting, not just on an individual home level, but you can also do it by zip code based on the systems that we manage and the data that we have. We're going to be able to do very accurate capacity forecasting with significant uptime warranties so that utilities can rely on that capacity really being there. So just take a step back. We need to optimize for the variable flexible assets behind the meter. Then we need to layer that into various systems that are in a certain area in front of the meter. And between all those systems and the data that we have, we can do capacity forecasting. And based on that capacity forecasting, we can then respond on an aggregated basis to the utility signal and provide that capacity that they need. And utilities are going to have to, I think they can only do that with counterparties, such as ourselves, that are bankable, that are reliable, that have 20 years of data. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary this quarter, which is quite something for a company in our space. And so utilities have to really be able to trust that that capacity will really be there. And that's a huge leap for them, right? It's very different from controlling your own power plants and turning them off when you need it. And we've been working really hard on that. And our uptime is very, very high. But the utilities that we've partnered with is the utilities really need to trust that they can aggregate capacity at scale from a counterparty they can trust that will be there, that even if they don't perform, they have recourse to that counterparty for liquidated damages or what have you. And so that's where I think Enphase is going to be a very meaningful player in this space, because we have the balance sheet, we have $1.5 billion of cash, we have the data, 20 years of data, and we have incredible amount of software. I mean, we have hundreds of software engineers in our company. People don't realize that. They think, oh, you're just a hardware company. No, not at all. We have hundreds of software engineers that report into my colleague, Radu Taverla, and what they're building is absolutely amazing. And so I think we will, back to the original question, like, can we play at scale? Yes. Can it be dependable? Yes. Will utilities rely on it? They have to, because I don't see how we're going to deploy the kind of capacity that's needed within a time frame that we're all facing without leveraging distributed flexible capacity. And this is really incumbent upon us to execute on. And so I think there are some very good years ahead.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And one thing I'm really fascinated by is how bidirectional electric vehicles play into these aggregations, these virtual power plants or VPPs you're describing. A few years ago, everyone was saying, oh, that's so far away. Now you're hearing about bidirectional EVs all over the place.
Yep.
And wow, there are so many cars. And now we can make them into these kind of little power plants. You can own your own little power plant that you can move around the grid. What an incredible transformation.
Yeah, I see it as a tremendous opportunity. And again, you're going to need a lot of software to pull all of that together to do accurate capacity forecasting, because when a utility relies on a battery at a home, that battery is stationary. It's there all the time, right? So now the car An average car battery has 7 to 10 times more capacity than a home battery. And so the additional capacity that can come online by swapping out the old inverter for a bidirectional inverter, and as long as the OEM for the car manufacturer is integrated and compliant, and we're working with those. So without naming anyone, Enphase is working with several of the major EV OEMs to make sure that when we do have our bidirectional inverter, that we are integrated with some of these OEMs so that people can actually use it. But what I really see is mobile, dispatchable, aggregated power plants called the car that will provide not only value to the homeowner for optimizing self-consumption at the end of the day or providing backup to the home, but also being able to dispatch from that car to the grid when capacity is needed most and getting paid for that. And so what we will be working on very actively, and you'll see that this year, is not only is an Enphase battery going to be integrated into a utilities VPP, we're also going to integrate the bidirectional inverter and work with utilities to expand the VPP programs that they have to include the bidirectional EV charger. And the opportunity is massive. Many of the solar adopters are also EV drivers. So we have an existing client base to go back to. And we can see from the data that we have, because we have consumption and production data on the customer, we have a lot of data that we're going to mine, is we can pretty much see, based on consumption patterns, who's an EV owner and who's not. And so there'll be a day when we are live with this product that we can push a message to all of our millions of customers that based on the data we believe have an EV already, and may not yet have an Enphase EV charger, and offer them an upgrade that provides backup to their home, an upgrade that allows them to make money with our bidirectional EV charger, dispatching to the grid, and integrating that into VPP programs. And one of the things that we're doing very actively is we're rolling out our VPP integration. So we are already integrated with over 55 VPPs. That's going to accelerate this year. We're talking to all the major utilities and also the DERMS providers that are integrated with them. And at the end of the day, we just want to give homeowners the ability to participate in a democratizing energy economy and make money. And I think where you're going to see the shift is from saving money, which was the solar only product, to making money when you bundle flexible capacity, including the bidirectional EV charger, and you get the homeowner to really participate in an energy democracy without having to do a lot because the AI will do it all for them.
Yeah, as I hear you speak, it strikes me that it seems like the industry is really striving to create easy buttons for both the utilities and the customers. So the utility, we need them to be able to easily use the many home solar panels and batteries and electric vehicles as aggregated resources, as virtual power plants. And they have to look like a power plant to the utility, right? They can't be dealing with all these different things. And then at the same time, for the customer, we're trying to get to the point where it's just not a hassle. You get the money or bill credits from ownership and from participating in the grid without the hassle.
Yeah, and we're going to work with utilities to help shape those programs. But at the end of the day, if you're a homeowner and you're the owner of what essentially is dispatchable capacity, whether it's the battery or the EV, and you want to make that capacity available to the network and to the utility, then we're going to figure out, number one is which utilities are going to need it, how do they value it, make sure there are programs being put in place, and make sure the homeowner gets paid for making available that dispatchable capacity. And whereas maybe a few years ago, I thought this is going to be a really hard sell with utilities, there's not a single utility right now that's not worried about how do I find capacity. And that is a serious concern, particularly in some of the states where the big data centers are being built. And one may say, well, they're all being built in Texas or Ohio or where have you. Not really true. Some data centers need to stay very close because of low latency to where the actual customers are. And so you have them here too in California. I think we're going to work much more as really close partners with utilities to figure out how we turn what used to be a relatively dumb asset called solar only into bundled flexible capacity to help solve their problems and get homeowners paid.
Yeah, I live in Virginia where data centers are driving up electric demand quite a bit. And I posted an article this week about a whole slate of distributed energy bills Virginia lawmakers have proposed to advance distributed energy. And I thought, wow, they're getting it. They see that distributed energy can really help solve this demand problem. But that's not a common view, right? So I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. It's been a common refrain that distributed energy can't supply the grid at scale. I don't know if I buy that, but we do hear it all the time from the naysayers. Too small, can't possibly achieve the capacity we need. We need to build lots of big power plants instead and transmission lines. How do you think about that?
This is not going to be a choice anymore. It's not going to be a either or. It's going to be and. So I'll give you an example. In the Netherlands, a third, not 8% like the United States, but a third of all homes have solar. In Australia, the number is about the same. If we did that here, we would actually solve the problem, like immediately solve the problem. If we go from 8% to 33% of homes, just like they did in the Netherlands or Australia, we would add not just a few, but we would add a couple of 100 gigawatts of capacity. And then when you couple that with storage, it becomes dispatchable capacity and it solves the problem. It can solve the problem. It really can. And it can go very quickly. Australia put in place a rebate recently for homeowners to add storage. And that is just going very fast right now. Very, very fast. And so the government has for a long time subsidized fossil fuel in the trillions. And I don't see that being a solution right now. Because you try to buy a gas turbine from GE right now. Good luck. Try to buy a gas turbine from Siemens right now. Good luck. You're going to be in the waiting line. You want to add solar to your home and battery storage? We can do that in a week. And so this is infinitely scalable. If we were at some really high level penetration where there are congestion issues, things like that, I would say, okay, we've got to be a little careful here. But we're only at 8% penetration in the United States. We got a long way to go here. To your point, of course, regulators are thinking about this. You know, I was recently at a dinner which also included the chair of the PUC and then also the chair of the California Energy Commission. The discussion there was around distributed flexible capacity. Google was there. And I think we're all going to come together. We're going to solve this problem together. It's not an either or. It's going to be an and. And the fastest capacity that we can deploy is distributed through an interconnection point that's already there. It's there. We should take it. I think Chamath was right in the observation he made. I'm glad Donald Trump put it on his Truth Social. Now, as a country, we got to come together and turn that into action. Chamath was talking about putting together a massive tax equity fund that could help facilitate this. That's an idea. We could talk about tax credits for homeowners, just like you got tax credits to buy an EV for some period of time. I know that 25D went away. It was a great tax credit, went away. Now a lot of that's going to shift to the TPO market, whether that be a lease or a prepaid lease kind of model. The TPOs will do very well. We're integrated with all of them and we'll continue to support that. But I think Chamath's idea about unleashing a massive amount of tax equity is not a bad idea, government backed. I think there are different ways to skin this cat, and I think we can, and we should, and we will.
So let me go back to one more thing before we wrap up. We talked a lot about the sort of growing détente between at least some segment of the utility industry and the competitive DER industry. But one thing I often hear is a real concern about these utility partnerships is that they'll slow innovation. You know, utilities just aren't known for their innovation. And better that they're not too involved. Better they don't have too much control of distributed energy, thus the innovations slow down. What do you say to those skeptics? How do you think about that?
It's a fair concern, potentially, but I think they will move forward out of sheer necessity. At the end of the day, the utility business model was all built around building assets, owning them, operating them, getting a PUC-approved ROI on those assets, and provide return to shareholders and hopefully good service to customers. That hasn't worked out super well exactly. Utility rates continue to rise, service is subpar, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on them to provide capacity additions to support demand from data centers and other big loads coming online. There's a quantum computing company called PsiQuantum that's going to connect a 300 megawatt load in Illinois. And that's going to be a huge challenge for ComEd, right? And so I think out of sheer necessity, we are going to work together. We're going to have to think about how does a utility make money even if they don't own the asset. In some cases, they may be able to place it in front of the meter and rate base it and still own the asset. We're going to need all of us to come together because it cannot be a bilateral discussion between, for instance, Enphase and the utility. You're going to have to involve the regulators. You're going to have to involve the PUC. You're going to have to involve the California Energy Commission, for instance, in California. But I believe, just by having seen all those players in the same room recently, I think that this will move in the right direction. We will solve this. It's not going to be us versus them. And out of sheer necessity, we're going to have to figure out together how to deploy a massive amount of distributed flexible capacity that provides both a service to the homeowner and dispatchable capacity to the utility that needs to meet these very large loads that are going to come online. And if we don't solve that on a state level, businesses will leave. They will leave. And so I don't think this is a choice. We're going to have to figure it out also with the leadership of the governor, how to transition this and move this forward. And I don't think it's an either or, it's going to be an end-end.
Fascinating. Sounds like you're saying the game has changed and everyone's moved their position on the board.
Absolutely. We're seeing a paradigm shift that's starting. And what gives me a lot of hope and encouragement is that this is not some kind of white paper that hasn't been implemented. It's being implemented. I mean, there are progressive CCAs. Look at San Diego Community Power that launched a significant VPP program, of which we're a proud partner. Look at Green Mountain Power. They literally proved the model. Green Mountain Power in Vermont has proved the model, how you can rely on distributed flexible capacity and ultimately improve service to the homeowner and lower cost to the customer, which they call the customer. They go call the ratepayer, which is an interesting distinction. And, we're seeing this in Europe as well. Octopus Energy, 1.5, those are very big players that are proving that this model works. And so I think we have good examples out there. Now we just need to grab the bull by the horn and come together and execute in both regulated states and deregulated states.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marco, for being on the show. You are a wealth of insight and information.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on the Energy Changemakers Podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think differently about the role of distributed energy in our society. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving us a review. You can help us shape the dialogue around energy. Go to energychangemakers.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our community. Together, we can make a real difference in how quickly we can make our grid local, equitable, and clean.